Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. We're on the traditional lands of Treaty 6, and we thank the diverse Indigenous people whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries. We also acknowledge the Métis homeland, a welcoming land for all who call Edmonton home. My name is Marie Renaud, and I am the New Democrat Shadow Minister for Community and Social Services. Joining me is disability advocate Zachary Weeks, and of course the leader of Alberta's New Democrats, Naheed Nenshi. We're here to talk about Danielle Smith's her UCP government's dangerous attack on disabled Albertans. This attack goes far beyond forcing AISH recipients further into poverty with the UCP's unconscionable theft of the $200 new federal disability benefit. The UCP is blowing up supports for disabled Albertans. We'll see the extent of the damage they're attempting to do later this fall when legislation introduced, but here's some of the damage that they're already inflicting. First, they de-indexed AISH payments, meaning as inflation soared, AISH stayed the same. They have cut off access to family support for children with disabilities. They have essentially stopped intake for FSCD, which is Family Supports for Children with Disabilities, and PDD, which is Persons with Developmental Disabilities Supports for Adults. The wait lists have been hidden since 2021. They're stealing, of course, the new $200 disability benefit. And most alarming of all is they are widespread blowing up AISH, and they're moving everybody to a new program they call ADAPT, which is Alberta Disability Assistance Program, which is essentially a program that will force people with disabilities to again prove that they are severely or profoundly disabled. And the UCP is saying this is a good move because they can work. Never mind, this government has been a dismal failure in creating successful pathways to employment. All of this, simply put, is part of the UCP agenda of cuts, chaos, and corruption, and it is so cruel. It's happening with no transparency, making the situation so much more difficult for people trying to survive on meager supports. So joining me to give you a little bit more information about that is Zachary Weeks.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you everyone for coming today. Every day I hear from people who are barely getting by. They're exhausted, they're anxious, they are fearful, and in tears. And instead of easing that burden, this government is adding to it. Decisions are being made by people who've never lived on AISH, who don't know what it's like to choose between paying for food and medication, and who don't seem interested in listening. We've seen benefits cut, advocacy silenced, new programs designed to deny support instead of expand it. And while that happens, we're having to do more with less, being forced to prove once again that we are disabled and need programs like AISH, PDD, and the CDB they stole from my community. It is irresponsible and dehumanizing, and we deserve better. I'm now happy to have Naheed make some final comments before we take your questions. Naheed.
Thank you very much, Zachary. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for being here. It's important that Albertans hear what you and the thousands and thousands and thousands of Albertans who are in the same boat as you are really being forced to deal with every single day. I'm a pretty even-keeled guy. Politics is politics, and sometimes we disagree on policies, but I got to tell you, the way that this government treats vulnerable people and the way this government treats people with disabilities makes me furious. This summer, I've been traveling across the province on what we're calling our Better Together conversations, and every single stop, I hear from people with disabilities, I hear from parents of children with disabilities who are in tears, having no idea how they're going to make ends meet coming September. The current Premier and her government don't care about improving disability support programs or services. They don't care about people. They don't care about people living a dignified life. They don't care about creating pathways for people to be prosperous and thrive. They care about their own political survival. And they feel like their political survival depends on punching down on vulnerable people. And now we're seeing that with people with disabilities as well. They're conducting a systemic attack on people with disabilities, an attack that is doing real harm to people. Every single day, my caucus members and I get calls from people who have become so desperate that they say, should I consider medical assistance in dying? That's what this government has done. They're actually saying to people, death might be a good option for you instead of living in Danielle Smith's Alberta. This is heartbreaking that people are being pushed this far. Our province is in an affordability crisis. Every single one of us is having trouble struggling. Every single one of us is struggling to make ends meet. Well, except for one group. I'll tell you who's not struggling to make ends meet. UCP caucus members. They actually voted this year to increase their rent provision for rent in Edmonton to $2,200 a month just for rent. And we asked them why, and they said because the rents are going up. Yet, they're cutting AISH. And let's be clear, they are cutting AISH. They are cutting AISH by at least $200 for every single low-income person with disabilities who qualifies for that program. So while they give themselves $2,200 a month just for rent, they're expecting AISH recipients to live on a total of $1,700 a month for everything. And again, this UCP government comforts the comfortable and attacks those who need a hand up, those who are a little bit more vulnerable. If it's not raising costs, it's taking away services, as you heard Marie say. It's unfair and it's cruel. AISH payments were already below the poverty line. Don't let Jason Nixon tell you we're so generous. We're so generous that we make people have unbelievable financial stress every single month, having to choose between groceries and rent. That's not generous. And what this so-called generous government is doing is cutting $200 for every single person. This morning, the minister had the guts to blame the federal government again because that's all they know how to do. And he blamed the federal government this morning, saying it's too hard for people to apply for this benefit that they're never going to see because I'm taking it away. Why would you go through all these hoops and apply for that benefit when you're never going to see the money? Oh, well, Jason Nixon says, we're going to take that money away from you whether or not you get it. So it could be a $400 a month cut for some people. Things have to change. We're still the richest province in the country. We have the ability to help every Albertan thrive and every Albertan live a life of dignity on this land. So we're calling on the UCP, for once in your careers, admit you were wrong. You're the only ones in the country who are cutting this benefit. Everyone else is allowing people with disabilities to get just that little $200 a month, that little bit of dignity, that little bit of not being scared when you go to the till at the grocery store. Maybe you can afford to go to a movie once in a while. So Jason Nixon and Danielle Smith, do what every other province is doing and let people keep their money. Furthermore, let's update AISH payments to reflect inflation and re-index them the way that the New Democrat government did. And drop your theft of this $200, because that's what it is. You are thieves and you are stealing money that properly belongs to people with disabilities. The UCP government has to abandon its very badly make it up as we go along, very badly designed Alberta Disability Assistance Program and figure out ways where we can get people with disabilities into pathways to true employment if that's what makes sense for them, but mostly into a life where they can thrive and be prosperous. Let's remember that unemployment under this government is higher than it was when Rachel Notley left office. They haven't been able to manage the economy in any way, and now they're telling people with disabilities, go get a job. Well, here's the thing, there are no jobs. The unemployment rate for young men is the highest it's ever been, and we want people with disabilities to compete in that same market with no supports whatsoever. And finally, Alberta needs accessibility legislation. We need legislation to be a framework to systematically remove barriers faced by people living with disabilities, and I'm thrilled to say that my colleague Marie Renaud will be introducing, as a private member's bill, Alberta's first ever accessibility legislation. Let's see what the UCP does with that. We need transparency. We need to work with people who are impacted by our decisions. I've said it before, I'll say it before, I've said it before and I'll say it again. This government has no interest in governing. They're only interested in political stakes. They're only interested in what will get them more votes so they can stay in power, because they're interested in power so they can pad their pockets and those of their friends. Governance is a responsibility. If you are given, even for a minute, the trust of Albertans to be able to run this province better, it's a real responsibility that you need to take seriously. This government has never, ever shown that it has. So, Premier Smith, Minister Nixon, take some responsibility, stop stealing the money, and help all Albertans live lives of dignity and prosperity. We're happy to take questions.
All right, everyone, we will be taking questions starting here in the room. Just a reminder that although this is an AISH news conference and we're hoping to get those questions out of the way, Mr. Nenshi will be available to answer any other questions that you have. Starting in the room, are there any questions? Come on over to me and we'll get you on the microphone. Jasmine King from Global News.
I'm not sure if maybe Zachary or Naheed, you might be whoever is best to answer this question, but obviously the government with this is saying that they want more people to work. But how many people currently on AISH can realistically work the hours needed to really make up that benefit?
Hi, that's a great question. So one of the things that they're saying is that we're creating this new program so people with disabilities can work. People on AISH already had that ability to work. So they had the ability to work and earn up to a certain amount, which was, I think it was actually close to $1,100 a month, actually, that they could keep before it would be clawed back. Now, the problem is people with disabilities, obviously, they tend not to be able to obviously work full-time forever, and that's why they're on AISH. They had to demonstrate that their disability is permanent and permanently impacts their ability to earn a living and support themselves. So this was a way for people who are permanently disabled, was to earn, save a bit of money, have a little bit of dignity. Now what they're doing is they're saying everybody, all 77,000, are all going to a new program called ADAPT, where they can work and do exactly the same thing that AISH allowed them to do. So it is no benefit to people. All that's going to happen is they're going to reduce their benefit by $200 and say, hey, it's great, you can work. But we already know that the unemployment rate for people with disability is twice that of their non-disabled peers. So we've not seen any success rates, any work being done to create employment for people with disabilities. So this is just another way for them to kind of wrap up a really cruel, really incompetent and poorly thought out program. Really, it's just about the bottom line. It's about cutting services and it's about cutting the number of people on AISH.
And Zachary.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, you know, if there was jobs, let's just get to the heart of it. So people with disabilities want to work. It's not like we're out here wanting to live on AISH. As we just heard, Naheed said they increased their own rent allowance to $2,200 because they couldn't make it comfortably. But at the end of the day, programs like ADAP are great, but how are we supposed to even start that process if nobody can get in the door to actually work? That's why we need legislation. That's why we need the supports that they're cutting, and we need programs that are pragmatic and realistic in achieving the goal of making sure people with disabilities can work and work meaningful jobs.
You know, last night I was in Red Deer and a couple came to speak with me at the town hall, a little bit older than me. They have a 27-year-old son and he is trying to live on his own. He is a graduate of a transitional vocational program, which is an educational program for people with disabilities to try and get them ready for the workplace. There are certain things he can do. There's a lot of things he can't do. He has a dyscalculus problem, so he can't work in retail or as a cashier or anything like that. But there are certain things he can do. However, with the unemployment among young people right now, those sorts of jobs, he's competing with sort of 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds who can work for minimum wage. Where is he supposed to find a job? His family has done everything they were supposed to do They got him the education they needed. He's out in the workforce. He's trying to live independently. There's just no jobs out there, and there's no pathways for him to be able to get there. And this family said, they were a little bit older than me, and they said, what happens as we get older? What happens when we need care? Who's going to look after him? He's not in a place where he can be independent. So as Zach says, many, many people living with disabilities want to work. They want to have that little bit of independence and that little bit of dignity. But we got to create a system that gives folks the hands up. And all the UCP has done is taken a financial benefit away. So it's a stick. Work or you will die in poverty. But if there are no jobs, what are you supposed to do? Where's the carrot here?
And just as a follow-up, I guess, how difficult do you imagine it might be for Albertans to prove that they still will need to be on AISH in the future?
Well, this is part of the mystery, right? So in 2019, when they changed the legislation, they moved eligibility for AISH out of the legislation so they could do stuff behind closed doors. So that's the big question, is we don't know what eligibility will be for AISH. So what their plan is, how I understand it, this isn't a government that likes to give a lot of clear information. What they're doing is taking all 77,000 people and moving them to this new program. Then they've said people that they determine will be profoundly disabled, they'll move back to AISH. We don't know what that means. Or people that are palliative, they'll move back to AISH, but we don't know what that means either. And everybody else will have a choice. You can apply for AISH again, but if you get turned down, then that's it for you. They're changing the way that people can appeal these decisions, and so fear is rampant. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. We've not seen the legislation, but based on this government's track record, they make decisions based on, election cycles and what's good for them and their bottom line. This isn't about consulting. They did not consult this disability community whatsoever to come up with this program.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I've lived with my disability my whole life. I've had the great honor to represent my community, and I will go down with a fight on this one. And I can confirm, because I am embedded in the everyday fabric of the disability community, that any consultations that were done, which were very few, were handpicked. So this is not an equal opportunity consultation. I would know if people were consulted, because I talk to the people that it affects every day. So I think what we're hearing is certainly not the truth.
Okay, so we're going to go to the phone line now, and Alexander's on the line from the Lethbridge Herald. Alexander, go ahead.
Oh, are you there?
Hi.
There we go.
So I've been following this for a while. I do have family and friends who are on the program. Can you just talk about, how difficult it actually is to apply for the Canadian Disability Tax Credit and the benefits as well? Because it's quite an extensive lot of paperwork.
Yeah, it's. I will tell you that this may shock you. Here's an area where I agree with Minister Nixon. You shouldn't have to constantly be proving that you have a disability. And the federal government should have said, look, if you're already on disability benefits from a provincial government, it's going to be automatic. They didn't do that, and they should have done that. But the challenge here is the fear that the Alberta government has put into people. If you don't apply to, what's the date? If you don't apply by September 5th. Thank you. So if you don't apply by next week, we're going to cut your AISH anyway. And in order to apply, until this morning, you still have to come up with $200, which is hard for people living below the poverty line. You have to find a family doctor who has a family doctor who is willing to take the time to take you through this process and fill out all of these forms. And if you don't do that by September 5th, your benefits are going to be cut by $200 anyway. So putting that fear into people over the summer, treating them with no dignity, treating them like they're just cattle, is just the worst thing this provincial government has ever done. And then to wait until almost September 1st for the provincial government to say, we'll reimburse you for that $200. We don't know how. We don't know what the process is. We don't know where the money is coming from. But to wait until now, after a summer of fear and anger with people living with disabilities, is just unconscionable.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I have received messages wherein I'm already seeing pay stubs, AISH pay stubs, that have not only reduced the $200, but reduced an additional $200. So people are in the whole $400 before they've been able to even prove that they've applied for this benefit. So it's clear that no matter what, the government is getting their money. They're not asking permission, and they're doing it before they're even supposed to, and there's photo evidence.
So for the journalists in the room, that is something worth following up on, because that means they're not only they're violating their own rules, but they're actually doubling the amount that they're taking away from AISH recipients. People who are already living below the poverty line now getting $1,500 a month to cover all of their expenses.
Alexandra, do you have a follow-up?
I do. And then with this new ADAP program, having, from my understanding, is people will have to reapply for AISH, which again is a difficult process, and it requires doctors, which are already wearing thin, literally. Can you just talk about kind of, number one, the stress, and then also, what happens if they're not able to find a doctor to help them?
Yeah, I mean, Zach, can you imagine, you're just going to wake up one morning and not have a disability, and then you're going to have to prove that you don't have it anymore. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And let's just be very clear on what's going on here. They're getting rid of AISH. I can't be more clear than that. But instead of being brave enough to just say AISH has fulfilled its purpose, we're going to try a new form of benefits for Albertans, which might actually be the right thing to do after tons of consultation. They're just getting rid of it through the back door. They're going to kick everybody off of AISH, and they're going to make it unbelievably difficult to prove what you've already proven over and over again, to get back on basic income support that, again, keeps you below the poverty line. Because their starting point when you apply for AISH is that you are a fraudster, and it's up to you to prove that you're not a fraudster. And let's keep in mind that our healthcare system is under unbelievable strain. Family doctors are on unbelievable strain, and now they're adding more work with no extra money to those folks that will cause waiting lists to grow even longer. It's ridiculous, and it's just not how you do government.
Zach, did you want to?
No, I think I'm good.
All right, we're going to come back into the room now and take another question from Jasmine King from Global on a different topic.
Yeah, I guess this is just for Naheed. I mean, with the, obviously talking about today with just the fiscal update, I mean, what concerns are there for low oil prices and how it may impact Alberta's finances?
Thanks, Jasmine. I'm looking forward to seeing the Q1 fiscal update later this morning. Here's the thing. This government is really, really bad with money. I have never seen a government that will go from it ended up being an $8.7 billion surplus last year to a minimum $6 billion deficit this year. And they had incredibly rosy projections for oil prices. Danielle Smith is the first premier in a generation who actually made our budget more reliant on royalties and oil prices rather than less. And so we're really sensitive to this. So I anticipate there's going to be a huge deficit today. And here's an interesting little financial factoid. The only thing preventing this government from going into complete financial ruin is the Trans Mountain expansion. The Trans Mountain expansion decreased the differential between Alberta oil and the world oil price, meaning billions of dollars to the Alberta Treasury. If that wasn't in place, we might have a record deficit under this government. And I'll ask all Albertans, well, at least they're spending money on things that matter to you, right? At least healthcare is better. At least public education is better. No, none of those things are true. The teachers are going on the verge of strike. The healthcare system has collapsed. And Albertans could be forgiven for asking, where are you spending the money? Are you spending it all on Turkish Tylenol and corrupt care? Are you spending it all on padding insiders' pockets? Because certainly Albertans aren't seeing the benefit of this spending, and we're not even getting a surplus to show for it.
And I guess what can the province do to potentially improve these numbers that we may hear?
Well, you got to be better on budgeting. You know, this government's only good at two things: picking fights and wasting money. So you got to stop wasting money. You know, let's look at healthcare, for example. The Premier said, oh, there's too much administration. So she created 7 organizations to replace 1 organization with 7 CEOs, 7 board chairs, and additional layers of management. They refuse to tell us how much they're spending on management and administration in the new system. I guarantee you it's 4 to 5 times what they spent before, for worse outcomes. So number one, you just got to be good at it. And you look at my record, 11 years at the City of Calgary, 11 straight balanced budgets, the lowest residential property taxes in the country. It is possible to budget well and focus your spending on stuff that makes people's lives better. This government just doesn't care.
All right, everyone. Oh, sorry, Paul.
I mean, you have, if there will be a deficit, and then the numbers
certainly
aren't as good, you know, the separatists are saying that, you know, Alberta will be so much better, we're spending all this money to Ottawa. But if the bubble bursts, is this kind of a warning sign for what could come?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, is this a, like...
Well, let's be clear on that. Every single separatist proposal would cost Albertans an unbelievable amount of money. So, for example, we know that setting up a provincial police service under Alberta government's own figures will cost us an additional $1.4 billion. We know that the cost of setting up an Alberta pension plan is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, and we don't trust Danielle Smith with money. She's going to take that Alberta pension plan and invest it in pet projects of her own. Remember Gainers, those who are old enough for that, or Novotel? This is not what we need. And quite frankly, the mythology that somehow Alberta sends more money to Canada than we get back is just not the case. Albertan taxpayers, because we tend to make more money, tend to spend more money than they need back in federal government benefits. But that could change any moment. If we fell into a recession and our unemployment grew even higher than under the UCP, then that math would completely shift. And that's what I think the Premier really doesn't ever tell the truth about. The fact is, a separate Alberta, if such a thing would ever happen, would face economic ruin, just like Quebec has, just like the UK has after Brexit. And we'll just see bigger and bigger deficits forever.
Paul, do you... All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
Can I just say one other thing
sure,
while
please,
I've got
sir.
everyone here? I have a public service announcement. The public service announcement is, I'm sad to say that it is the end of the summer. And that means we are going into the fall respiratory illness season. So I'm going to say something to you that Adriana LaGrange will never say to you. Get vaccinated. Get your flu shot. Last year we had a record number of flu deaths in Alberta, preventable. Last year we still had far more COVID deaths than we had flu deaths, mostly preventable. So please get your flu shot. And if you're a senior citizen, know that 85%, according to Adriana LaGrange, 85% of seniors will be able to get their COVID shot for free. So go on the site, register now, get your family to help you if you need, but get your vaccinations done. This is an important thing. And also for all the parents getting ready to get back to school, I know this is a tough time of year. Getting back to school is more unaffordable than it's ever been. And we're all scared about a teacher's strike because, again, of this government's mismanagement. But I just want to wish everyone a happy back to school, as happy as it can be. And here's hoping that we'll be able to get students and teachers back in the classroom as soon as possible. Thank you, everybody.